Well, howdy everybody, this is Wild Bill, your host on the Grain of Salt Show. Broadcasting near and wide, far and deep, even across the great water, both directions. We'd probably even make it to the North Pole. And the South Pole, if that exists. Y'all ain't gonna believe this, but some people think the earth is flat. You might be one of them. I might be one of them. You know, there's no telling what I believe. You got to take all of it with a grain of salt. Thinking about some scriptures that come to my mind. Let's get focused here. You know, and at first I didn't think that they had anything to do with false prophets and false teachers. I thought I was going to leave them alone for an episode or two, but nope. I'm thinking about 2 Timothy. You know, it's not a different Timothy. There's a 1 Timothy and a 2 Timothy, and this is a little bit of a Bible teaching. It's the same Timothy, same writer, writing to the same Timothy. There's not two Timothys. I know some of you thinking I'm being condescending. No, I'm trying to be a little bit funny. And I don't know if it works sometimes, but I'll be honest with you, I've had a rough few days. Challenging. And we're coming through it. That's the reason I haven't been able to I just hadn't done a video or something, because my mind has been occupied with my work, and as I'm sure that happens to you too. But you know, somebody might say, well, truck drivers, all y'all gotta do is hold a steering wheel and a gear shift and worry about 3 or 4 pedals down there and you know, keep it between the lines. Yes, and we gotta worry about all y'all too, because it seems like y'all ain't worried about us at all. I mean, you know, and I know it. There's some bad truck drivers out here that are dangerous. But let's all do our part, though, to not be one of those crazy people that gets on the road. Let's get into the Bible. But 2 Timothy chapter 3. If you have your Bible there, open it up. Verse 1. Now, I'm going to do my best to quote some of it, but I can't remember all of it. But he said in the last days, you know, there's going to be some hard times and some bad people. And yes, we've been talking about false prophets and false teachers, and they're going to be them. And it talks about, you know, how they pop up, and they're, you know, they're people, they're proud, they're boasters, they're revilers, they're disobedient to parents, and they're lovers of self and lovers of money, arrogant, you know. And we know Peter talks about them, how they spew arrogant nonsense, you know, and so on and so forth. And we know he's talking about false prophets and false teachers, those that are of the other team, because he mentions Jannes and Jambres or something like that. I know I'm quoting it wrong, but how they withstood against Moses, who was the true prophet of God. And he goes on down to say, he said, but Timothy, listen to me. You have to distinguish, basically, you have to distinguish between the true prophet, and Paul's talking about himself, and the false ones. And he says, you followed my doctrine, you followed my manner of life, you saw my purpose, my faith, my long suffering, how I did things, how I walked, my character, my love and my perseverance, and persecutions that come against me, and afflictions. And then he goes on to say, and what persecutions I endured. He's distinguishing himself from the false prophets and false teachers. Sounds very different from modern day prophets, doesn't it? It doesn't look like they're persecuted, or somebody might make fun of them because of all that they have, and they would stand up and say, see, we're being persecuted by my millions and billions that I have. I don't think that's what Paul was talking about himself. But he said, you can see by my manner of life, and you need to distinguish, because in these last days, he said, these false guys, they creep into weak women's houses. Who does that sound like? Weak women's houses. Other scriptures talk about how those false teachers and false prophets, they come in and they devour widows' homes. Sounds a lot like that, doesn't it? And sorry about that. He says, and then if you're not sure that he's talking about false teachers and false prophets, you can go on and read and keep reading. And he says, but evil men, imposters. That sounds a lot like Matthew chapter 7, does it? Where Jesus said that beware of false prophet who come to us in sheep's clothing, right? Imposters. And they will grow worse and worse, Paul tells Timothy, deceiving and being deceived. He says, but you, Timothy, you need to continue in what you've learned, knowing who you've learned it from. See, he's distinguishing himself, a true prophet and true teacher, from the false. So, I'm going to continue this, but take every bit of that with a grain of salt. I could be wrong, but look into it for yourself. Have a good day.